Rebecca Callahan's life was the stuff of suburban dreams, or so it seemed from the outside. Married to Luke, a charming but unassuming man, and mother to two precocious children, she inhabited a world of PTA meetings, soccer practices, and well-manicured lawns. Yet, beneath the polished veneer of their family home, cracks had begun to form. Luke worked long hours as an architect, often leaving Rebecca to manage their household alone. At first it was understandable, a man providing for his family. But gradually, the distance between them widened. Their once vivid connection dulled to the hum of routine, and Luke's affection became as sparse as his time at home. "You're being dramatic," her best friend, Melanie, had said one evening. "You've got it all, Bex. A great husband, beautiful kids. What more could you want?" Rebecca wanted to agree, but the longing in her heart spoke otherwise. Luke's neglect had become more than just an annoyance, it was a wound that ached for attention. And Mark Callahan, with his rugged charm and confident demeanor, had stepped into that void with impeccable timing. Mark had always been a commanding presence at family gatherings. Widowed for several years, he carried himself with an air of self-assurance that others mistook for arrogance. But Rebecca saw something deeper in him, a man who was unapologetically authentic. His compliments, casual and unexpected, filled the silence Luke left behind. It started innocently enough, a text here, a shared laugh at a family barbecue. Then came the night Mark suggested they meet for dinner. Rebecca hesitated but convinced herself it was harmless. After all, he was family. The restaurant was upscale but not overly pretentious. Rebecca dressed with care, choosing a deep blue dress that complemented her figure but wasn't overtly seductive. When Mark arrived, his tailored suit and confident stride made him look years younger. They shared pleasantries, ordered wine, and discussed everything from politics to family anecdotes. And then he leaned forward. His words, though casual, carried an unmistakable weight. "You deserve more, Rebecca. More than what Luke gives you." That evening was the beginning of a spiral Rebecca couldn't stop. Mark's suggestion, audacious and shocking, lingered in her mind long after the night ended. It wasn't just his words but the way he said them, with the conviction of a man who had nothing to lose. Rebecca thought of her children, the life she and Luke had built. Yet, she couldn't ignore the stirring within her, a need for validation, for passion. Her life had become a series of predictable moments, and Mark had introduced chaos into her ordered existence. But what she didn't know was that Luke had already begun suspecting her growing distance. Behind the scenes, he was unraveling her secrets, setting a plan in motion. And as Rebecca stood at the precipice of a life-altering decision, she was walking blindly into a trap. Rebecca's mind churned with Mark's proposition as she drove home. The memory of his gaze lingered, his words echoing louder with each mile she put between herself and the restaurant. Guilt gnawed at the edges of her thoughts, but there was something else too, an ember of defiance flickering against the monotony of her marriage. When she pulled into the driveway of their suburban home, the house was dark except for the faint glow of the porch light. Luke was working late again. The kids were with her mother for the weekend. Normally, she'd relish the quiet, but tonight it felt oppressive. She poured herself a glass of wine, sat in the living room, and replayed the evening over and over. Mark had been relentless. His confidence, the way he looked at her like she was a prize he was determined to claim, left her breathless and unnerved. But it was his final words before they parted that haunted her. "Sometimes, we have to make selfish choices to remind ourselves that we're alive." The next day, Rebecca couldn't shake her unease. Mark sent her a simple text, "Thinking about last night." She didn't respond but stared at the message long enough to memorize every pixel. Her emotions swirled, a storm of fear, curiosity, and a shameful excitement she couldn't ignore. By afternoon, she had convinced herself to delete the message and move on. But fate, or perhaps Mark, had other plans. Her phone buzzed again. Dinner was just the beginning. "Meet me tonight. Same place." Rebecca's breath hitched. Her thumb hovered over the phone, her mind screaming 1,000 reasons to decline. Yet, as the hours crawled by, her resolve faltered. The possibility of something reckless, something thrilling, was intoxicating. That evening, Rebecca arrived at the restaurant feeling like an imposter in her own life. She wore a sleek black dress, understated but alluring, and tried to quell the rising tide of doubt. Mark was already there, waiting at the bar. His smile was predatory, his confidence unsettlingly magnetic. "Rebecca," he greeted, rising to kiss her cheek. His touch lingered a moment too long. They sat in a quiet corner booth, their conversation charged with a tension that neither could deny. But as the evening wore on, Rebecca began to feel that something wasn't right. Mark was charming, as always, but there was a certain intensity in his demeanor, a deliberate edge to his words. When the check arrived, Mark leaned forward, his voice low. "Let's not waste any more time, Rebecca. My place is close." Rebecca's pulse quickened. The boldness of his invitation took her breath away. Every rational part of her screamed to say no, but another part, the part that craved the attention Luke no longer gave, whispered yes. She followed Mark in her car, her hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. They pulled into the driveway of his sleek, modern home, and for a moment, Rebecca hesitated. But Mark was already opening her car door, his smile disarming. Inside, the house was immaculate, its minimalist decor betraying nothing of the man who lived there. He poured them each a glass of wine, guiding her to the sofa. Rebecca's nerves were taut as a bowstring, but she couldn't deny the electricity in the air. Mark leaned in, his lips brushing her ear as he whispered, "You deserve this." Before she could respond, the front door burst open. Rebecca froze as Luke stepped into the room, his face a mask of cold fury. Behind him, a burly man with a camera appeared, capturing the scene in rapid-fire flashes. "Luke!" Rebecca gasped, leaping to her feet. Luke didn't respond. His eyes bore into her, filled with a rage that made her stomach twist. He turned to Mark, who stood unfazed, casually sipping his wine. "You set this up," Rebecca hissed, realization dawning too late. Mark smirked. "It's amazing what you can accomplish with a little planning." As the weight of the situation hit her, Rebecca felt the walls of her life crumbling around her. Luke, still silent, handed her a folder, proof of her betrayal, meticulously documented. Her knees buckled as she scanned the damning photos, texts, and receipts. "I trusted you," Luke finally said, his voice low and filled with hurt. "And this is how you repay me?" "Luke, please," Rebecca began, but he cut her off with a raised hand. "Save it. The kids are staying with me. You can explain your actions to the court." With that, he turned and walked out, leaving Rebecca alone with Mark and the cold realization of her choices. Rebecca sat alone in Mark's living room, the weight of the folder in her lap crushing her. The damning photos, the texts she thought she had deleted, all of it was there, meticulously organized. Her mind raced, trying to piece together how this betrayal had unfolded. The memory of Luke's expression, cold, broken, and resolute, was seared into her consciousness. "How could you do this to me?" she whispered, her voice trembling as she looked up at Mark. Mark shrugged, his calm demeanor infuriating. "It wasn't personal, Rebecca. Luke came to me weeks ago. He suspected something was off and wanted answers. I gave him the proof he needed." He leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "The rest? That was just opportunity." Rebecca's heart pounded. "You set me up. You planned this." Mark tilted his head, unbothered. "You think you're blameless here? I didn't make you come to dinner. I didn't force you to say yes. You made those choices." In the days that followed, Rebecca's world unraveled with breathtaking speed. Luke's lawyer contacted her within 24 hours, delivering divorce papers and a court order that temporarily gave him custody of their children. He had already moved out, taking the kids to his sister's house in another city. Rebecca's home felt foreign, stripped of their laughter and warmth. She wandered the rooms aimlessly, the silence deafening. Every corner seemed to mock her, photos of family vacations, drawings the kids had proudly taped to the refrigerator, even the faint scent of Luke's cologne on the couch. But it was the absence of her children that hollowed her out the most. When she called, Luke answered with cold efficiency, refusing to let her speak to them directly. "They're better off without you right now," he said. "You need to figure yourself out." Desperate, Rebecca turned to Melanie for support. They met at a local cafe, but the comfort Rebecca sought wasn't there. Melanie's usually warm demeanor was edged with judgment. How did you let this happen, Bex? Melanie asked, stirring her coffee absently. Mark? Of all people? I don't know, Rebecca admitted, her voice breaking. I was lonely, Mel. Luke, he wasn't there anymore. I didn't plan for this. It just happened. Melanie sighed. Look, I'm not defending Luke, he should have been more attentive. But Mark? He's toxic, Rebecca. Everyone knows it. You let him manipulate you. Rebecca clenched her hands around her coffee cup. I didn't think he'd betray me like this. No, Melanie said bluntly. You didn't think at all. With nowhere else to turn, Rebecca decided to confront Mark again. She needed answers, or at least some semblance of closure. When she arrived at his house, he opened the door with a bemused smile. Rebecca, he greeted smoothly. To what do I owe the pleasure? Cut the act, Mark, she snapped, stepping inside. You played me. You ruined my family. Mark's expression shifted, his smugness hardening into something darker. You ruined your family, Rebecca. I just held up a mirror. She stared at him, her anger boiling over. Why? What did you even get out of this? Luke and I have an arrangement, he said simply. Let's just say I owed him a favor, and this, well, this was easy. Rebecca's stomach twisted. You're sick. Mark shrugged. I don't care what you think. What's done is done. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have better things to do. As Rebecca left his house, a plan began to form in her mind. Mark had exploited her vulnerability, and Luke had left her without so much as a chance to make amends. But if she wanted her family back, she needed to stop being a victim and take control of her narrative. She started small, reaching out to a therapist to confront her own choices and patterns. She needed to understand why she had let herself fall into Mark's trap and how she could rebuild her self-worth. At the same time, she began collecting evidence of her own. Mark wasn't untouchable, and she was certain he had skeletons in his closet. If she could prove his manipulations went beyond her, she might have a chance to turn the tide in her favor. And Luke, she wouldn't give up on him. Not yet. If she could show him that she was truly remorseful and willing to change, maybe, just maybe, she could earn a second chance. Rebecca's days blurred into a whirlwind of self-reflection, strategizing, and desperate attempts to regain control of her life. The house that once bustled with laughter and chaos now echoed with solitude. She would sit for hours in her children's rooms, staring at their toys and books, feeling the chasm their absence created. But grief, she realized, wouldn't fix anything. Action would. She started therapy in earnest, peeling back the layers of her choices. Her therapist, a kind but firm woman named Dr. Hayes, didn't mince words. You've been running on autopilot, Rebecca, Dr. Hayes said during one session. Neglected emotions don't disappear, they fester. You've been lonely, yes, but you also made conscious decisions to fill that void recklessly. Rebecca nodded, tears streaming down her face. But I didn't want this. I didn't want to destroy my family. Intentions don't erase actions, Dr. Hayes replied gently. The question now is, what are you willing to do to rebuild? Determined to prove she was more than her mistakes, Rebecca threw herself into uncovering the truth about Mark. She knew his betrayal hadn't been about mere infidelity, it had been calculated. If she could expose his manipulations, she might have a chance to reclaim her dignity and, more importantly, her family. She started by digging into his past. Mark's polished exterior hid a life riddled with questionable deals and strained relationships. Conversations with extended family members painted a picture of a man who thrived on control and chaos. Her breakthrough came when she contacted a former colleague of Mark's, a woman named Cynthia who had worked with him on a real estate deal years ago. Mark Callahan. Cynthia snorted when Rebecca mentioned his name over the phone. I'm surprised he's still walking free. What do you mean? Rebecca pressed, her heart pounding. Cynthia sighed. Mark has a history of shady partnerships. He manipulated me into investing in a project that turned out to be a scam. I lost everything. He's a master manipulator, Rebecca. Be careful. Armed with this information, Rebecca started piecing together a pattern of Mark's predatory behavior. He targeted vulnerable people, exploiting their weaknesses for his gain. She began documenting everything she could find, creating a dossier that painted a damning portrait of him. Meanwhile, Rebecca's attempts to reach Luke were met with silence. Each unanswered call and curt text felt like a nail in the coffin of their relationship. But she refused to give up. One evening, she decided to write him a letter. Pouring her heart onto the page, she admitted her failures, apologized for her actions, and explained the steps she was taking to change. She sent the letter, hoping against hope it might reach him in a way her words hadn't. To her surprise, a week later, Luke called. "I got your letter," he said, his voice cold but less distant than before. "I'm not ready to talk about us yet, but I'll give you a chance to see the kids." Supervised. Relief flooded Rebecca's chest. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a step forward. On the day of the visit, Rebecca felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. Luke's sister's house was cozy, with a sprawling backyard where the kids played. When her son and daughter spotted her, they ran to her with shouts of "Mommy." Tears filled Rebecca's eyes as she hugged them tightly, vowing silently to never let them go again. Luke watched from the porch, his arms crossed. He looked tired, his usual confident demeanor subdued. After the kids ran off to play, Rebecca approached him cautiously. "Thank you for this," she said. He nodded but didn't meet her eyes. "They miss you." "I miss what we had." Rebecca's heart clenched. "Luke, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." For the first time in weeks, his gaze softened, but his voice remained firm. "Prove it. Words aren't enough anymore." Rebecca's next move was bold but necessary. She confronted Mark at his office, walking in unannounced with the dossier she had compiled. He was seated behind his sleek desk, exuding the same smug confidence that had once captivated her. "Rebecca," he said, feigning surprise. "What a pleasant." "Save it," she snapped, slamming the dossier onto his desk. "You used me. But this ends now." Mark's expression flickered, his composure slipping for the first time. "What is this?" "Everything," she said, her voice steady. "Your scams, your manipulations. You think you're untouchable, but you're not. If you don't back off, if you don't leave me and my family alone, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly who you are." Mark leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You've got some fire in you, Rebecca. I like that. Don't mistake my determination for a game," she said. "This is your only warning." That confrontation marked a turning point. Rebecca continued working on herself, attending therapy, volunteering at a local shelter, and slowly rebuilding the trust of her community. When Luke agreed to attend a joint therapy session, she felt a glimmer of hope. During the session, Luke admitted his own shortcomings. "I wasn't there for you, Rebecca. I let work consume me, and I pushed you away. But what you did, it broke me." "I know," Rebecca said, tears in her eyes. "And I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you'll let me." Their journey toward reconciliation was slow and fraught with setbacks, but it was progress. Months later, Rebecca stood in the backyard of their home, watching as Luke played catch with their son. Her daughter tugged at her hand, giggling, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Rebecca felt a sense of peace. She had made mistakes, terrible ones, but she had also fought to make amends. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, she knew she was stronger for having walked it. Months passed, and the delicate truce between Rebecca and Luke began to resemble a fragile bridge, one that held the weight of their shared past but trembled under the strain of their broken trust. Rebecca worked tirelessly to prove she had changed. She maintained transparency, provided space when Luke needed it, and never missed a therapy session. Yet, as much as she rebuilt, the specter of her betrayal loomed large, a shadow that neither could fully escape. The children, blissfully unaware of the storm that had rocked their family, brought moments of fleeting joy. Watching Luke read bedtime stories to their son, Rebecca often felt a pang of regret so sharp it stole her breath. She longed for the easy intimacy they once shared but feared that her actions had destroyed it beyond repair. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, Rebecca found Luke in the kitchen, staring at an open bottle of wine. He seemed lost in thought, his expression distant. "Everything okay?" she asked softly. Luke looked up, his jaw tightening. Just thinking. Rebecca hesitated before stepping closer. About us? He nodded. It's not easy, Rebecca. I want to forgive you, I really do, but some days, it feels impossible. Rebecca placed a hand on his arm, her voice trembling. I'll keep trying, Luke. For as long as it takes. Luke's eyes softened, but the moment was interrupted by the sharp buzz of his phone on the counter. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. It's the lawyer, he said, grabbing his phone and walking out of the room. Rebecca's heart sank. Though Luke had paused the divorce proceedings, the fact that he hadn't dropped them entirely was a constant reminder of how precarious their situation remained. The next morning, Rebecca's life took an unexpected turn. A knock at the door revealed Cynthia, the woman who had helped her gather information about Mark. Dressed in a sharp blazer, Cynthia held a folder that she handed to Rebecca without a word. What's this? Rebecca asked, her brow furrowing. Something you need to see, Cynthia said, her tone grave. Mark's been involved in more than just real estate scams. I've been digging deeper, and I found evidence of something far worse. Rebecca's hands shook as she opened the folder. Inside were documents detailing a web of illegal activities, fraud, blackmail, and even connections to organized crime. The deeper she read, the more her stomach churned. What does this have to do with me? Rebecca whispered. Cynthia hesitated. Mark has been targeting you and Luke deliberately. This wasn't just about exposing your infidelity, it was part of a larger plan to ruin Luke's career. I think he saw you as the perfect pawn. Rebecca's blood ran cold. Why would he do that? Luke's firm blocked one of Mark's shady deals years ago, Cynthia explained. Mark's been harboring a grudge ever since. He couldn't take Luke down professionally, so he came after him personally. Armed with this new information, Rebecca called Luke immediately. When he arrived home, she laid everything out, desperate for him to understand the depth of Mark's deception. Luke listened in stunned silence, his face a mask of disbelief. You're telling me this was all part of some vendetta? Rebecca nodded, tears streaming down her face. I was a fool, Luke. I let him manipulate me, and I hate myself for it. But this isn't just about me anymore, it's about us, about our family. We can't let him win. Luke stood, pacing the room. Why didn't you come to me with this sooner? I didn't know the full extent until now, Rebecca pleaded. But we can fight this together. Please, Luke, let me help fix what I've broken. For the first time, something shifted in Luke's expression, a flicker of resolve. If Mark wants to play games, we'll make sure he regrets it. Over the next few weeks, Rebecca and Luke worked together, pooling their resources to build a case against Mark. Luke reached out to his legal contacts, while Rebecca coordinated with Cynthia to gather more evidence. The process was grueling, but it brought them closer in a way Rebecca hadn't expected. She saw glimpses of the man she had fallen in love with, the way he listened, the way he encouraged her even when she doubted herself. The turning point came when they discovered a crucial piece of evidence, a recording of Mark boasting about his schemes to an associate. It was the smoking gun they needed to expose him. On the day they confronted Mark, Rebecca's nerves were raw. They met at a neutral location, a conference room in a downtown office building. Mark arrived, his usual swagger intact, but it faltered when he saw Luke by Rebecca's side. Well, isn't this cozy? Mark drawled, taking a seat. To what do I owe the pleasure? Luke didn't mince words. We know what you've been up to, Mark. And we have proof. Mark's eyes narrowed, but his smirk remained. Proof of what? That your wife was willing to stray? That's old news. Rebecca slammed the recording device on the table. Proof that you've been playing everyone. Fraud, blackmail, all of it. Mark's face darkened as Luke pressed play. The recording filled the room, each damning word landing like a hammer blow. When it ended, Mark's expression was a mix of rage and panic. You think this changes anything? He sneered. You're just as guilty, Rebecca. Do you really think Luke will ever trust you again? Rebecca stood, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. This isn't about me anymore. This is about ending your games. Mark rose abruptly, but Luke blocked his path. You've already lost, Mark. Walk away now, or this recording goes straight to the authorities. For a moment, Rebecca thought Mark might lash out, but then his shoulders sagged, and he stormed out without another word. In the aftermath, Rebecca and Luke sat together in the empty conference room, the weight of their victory sinking in. Do you think it's over? Rebecca asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Luke sighed. It's a start. Rebecca reached for his hand, and for the first time in months, he didn't pull away. Instead, he laced his fingers with hers, a small but significant gesture. We still have a lot to figure out, he said. But I'm willing to try, if you are. Rebecca's tears fell freely, a mix of relief and gratitude. I'll never stop trying, Luke. Never. As they left the building together, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm glow on the city streets. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a new beginning, and for Rebecca, that was enough. What do you think of Rebecca's journey? Can love and trust survive such betrayal, or is forgiveness too high a price? Share your thoughts below.